Hi there. Okay, so I'm just gonna do something real quick with the display. I guess it won't let me. Okay, I'm using my DJI Osmo Pocket this time for recording, and um, I'm also hoping that this mic is doing a good job. Let me know if you can't hear me. Um, yeah, so long story short, we are going to continue with Brachot. יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהי ואלוהי אבותי, שלא יארע דבר תקלה על ידי, ולא אכשל בדבר הלכה. וישמחו בי חברי, ולא אמר על טמא טהור, ולא על טהור טמא, ולא על מותר אסור, ולא על אסור מותר, ולא יכשלו חברי בדבר הלכה, ואשמח בהם. כי אדוני ייתן חכמה מפיו דעת ותבונה, גל עיני והביט הנפלאות מתורתך. Okay, we were in the middle of the Rashi on the Mishnah on Rabbi Eliezer's opinion that it seems that, well, Rabbi Eliezer was saying that the end time for Kriyat Shema, the time limit for Kriyat Shema in the evening, is until the Sof HaShmura Harishona, the end of the first watch, which is a third of the night, according to Rashi. We know from the Yerushalmi that there's also another opinion that states that the Ashmura, the watches, are divided into four, not into three. But Rashi informs us that he holds, and I think the Yerushalmi also ends up ruling that the night is divided into three watches, or at least for the intents and purposes of Chazal, they go by the three watches and not the four watches. It could be that both were prevalent at the time. And it's interesting if this is just a pretty much like an arbitrary metric that the culture provided at the time, or if this is a metaphysical metric. This is something that is a reflection of something on high. And we'll see that later on in Berachot, there are it does seem to imply that it's not just a arbitrary metric, it's a metaphysical metric. But it could also be that it is a quote unquote arbitrary metric, which there really isn't anything arbitrary in our culture. Hashgacha pratis. However, it could be that it arose from below, but Hashem is appropriating his expression through the vessels we provide, so to speak. And in this case, the three watches. But we'll get to that eventually, Bezrat Hashem. And right now, Rashi is talking about, it seems that according to Rashi, all the Tanaim agree that it's a mitzvah from the Torah to say Kriyat Shema. So it made me ask when I noticed this, that it's possible that Rashi believes all the Tanaim believe this. It made me wonder if maybe the disagreement, whether it's from the Torah versus from the rabbis, if that disagreement isn't a disagreement in the Talmud, but rather it's or at least according to Rashi, it's not a disagreement in the Talmud, but rather it is a disagreement between the Rishonim, or something later than the Talmud. It could be the Svarim, could be the Geonim, it could be the Rishonim. So yeah. So let's just go over the Rashi again. Me'matai korin et shema ba'arvin. This is the first line of the Mishnah. From when do we say Shema in the evening? Misha'a shekohanim nichnasim le'echol bitrumatan. From the time that the priests enter to eat their elevation offering, or to partake in the eating of their elevation offering. And Rashi tells us that this is not any priest, this is kohanim shenitma'u. These are priests that were defiled, v'tavlu, and immersed in ritual immersion in order to purify themselves. V'he'eriv shimshan, and the sun went down on them. V'hegia itam le'echol batruma, and it was their time to eat from the elevation offering. And I believe later in the Gemara it speaks about these priests. So Rashi doesn't really go give us more information because the Gemara itself will give us all the rest of the details, at least that Rashi seems to deem sufficient. So, for example, when do the priests eat from the elevation offering? When they're not defiled. And what does being defiled have to do with eating from the elevation offering? And why doesn't the Mishnah tell us this explicitly? The Mishnah is probably assuming that we have foreknowledge, FORE, before reading the Mishnah about what it's referring to. So that might be why it's not telling us this explicitly. But what I don't understand, and this is a question basically that would require me to go study all the temple service, and specifically when it comes to purity and how that impacts the temple service, and particularly eating from the offerings, and particularly the elevation offerings. What I don't understand at the moment is how is it that I mean, isn't the earliest time? I already have the answer. But my question was, isn't the earliest time to eat from an elevation or from any offering the dusk, when the nightfall, or meaning or sunset? Like when the night begins, isn't that the earliest time? By the way, I have something to say about Rashi, but we'll get to that in a moment. What's interesting is I was going to ask, wait, but if the earliest time to eat an offering is in the beginning of the new day, which is the evening, the beginning of the evening, then what does it matter if you're defiled or not? Even a pure person should be the earliest time they can eat from the offering. But then I remembered that no, that's not how offerings work, right? They begin in the morning and they end in the next morning if they're one day from the Torah, according to Rabban Gamliel, and according to the sages, according to Rabban Gamliel. But um and therefore, yeah, so it seems I would guess that the elevation offering can be eaten at least for one day, which means the morning till the next morning, or the morning and the evening until some time. It could be until the first third of the night, and it could be until midnight, and it could be until the next morning. By the way, this is getting me thinking, and this really is something that requires much more knowledge in Torah to answer. But I wonder if the disagreement between Rabbi Eliezer, Chachamim, and Rabban Gamliel isn't just about Kriyat Shema. It's about what Rabban Gamliel mentions in the incident, where he says, "Veloza bilvad." Not only regarding Kriyat Shema did the sages say that it's till midnight, but it's actually till dawn, but rather everything that is eaten for one day, and also um, fats and evarim, chalavim ve'evarim, these are also, there's a disagreement about till when you can do it. So it could be that according to Rabbi Eliezer, you can do all of these mitzvahs only till the end of the first watch, or a third of the night. Meaning anything that can be eaten for one day, yeah. Yeah, I'm really making things complicated here. It goes back in some respect, especially according to Rashi's reading, because Rashi, this is totally not in alignment with Rashi. Because Rashi tells us that Rabbi Eliezer's reasoning for Kriyat Shema is based on the verse for Kriyat Shema, Uveshach becha. It's interesting that Rabban Gamliel creates that parallel between Kriyat Shema and these other mitzvahs. When Rabban Gamliel, according to Rashi, reasons, uses his bases his reasoning off of the verse for Kriyat Shema specifically, and yet he still creates that parallel. Now, it could just be a practical parallel, meaning pragmatically, any mitzvah that's for all of night, the sages wanted to put a safeguard and only allow it till midnight. Whether the reason you can do it for all of night is because it's the time where people are lying down, or it's because the Torah explicitly states that you can do it yom balayla, day and night. That's a practical answer for that. But it's possible that you can derive or not derive, but it's possible that maybe there's a deeper parallel, that there is an element of uveshokbecha, and you're lying down to all of these other mitzvahs. But I would say no, because, well, at least for anything that can be eaten for one day, because that would also mean if there's a parallel of uveshokbecha, then anything that can be eaten for one day, that only begins that should only begin when the evening begins, because it's according to uveshokbecha. So whatever. Out of that rabbit hole. So Rashi said that it's for the first. So yeah, let's go back to מאימתי קוראים את שמע בערבים משעה שהכהנים נכנסים לאכול בתרומתן, כהנים שנטמעו וטבלו והעריב שמשן. So this is something interesting. Rashi says, and the sun set for them והגיע איתם לאכול בתרומה. I see. Okay, so now I get it. I was going to ask, wait, the sun set for them, but the three stars haven't yet come out, and you're saying that. But then Rashi says "Vehegia itam," so he adds, and the time came for them to eat the elevation offering, which implies that it's not only that the sun set; it's after the sun set, then the time came. Okay, so that challenge is gone. Ad sof hashmara rishona, until the end of the first watch, divrei Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Eliezer. Shlish halayla kedemefaresh b'Gemara. This is the first third of the night, as it is explicitly stated in the Gemara in 2 pages. Daf Gimel Amud Aleph. Umisham be'elach havar zman. And then on out, time's up, according to Rabbi Eliezer. Delo mikrei tu zman shchiva, as it's no longer called the time for lying down, which means or implies that Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rashi, interprets uveshachbecha, the time for lying down, as the time for the process of lying down, and not only going to sleep but not being asleep, which is a very consistent reading, because that's how it seems all of Chazal read uvkumecha, your time for standing up, which seems to be read by all of Chazal as the time for getting up, not being up. So what really is the teruts for the 2 other sages according to Rashi's reading of them? That's a question. Why is there an inconsistency regarding the time for lying down versus the time for getting up? And I stated previously that the possible reason is that there is an essence of Kriyat Shema, which is that it is to set the tone for your day, and that is the specific time frame in which you say Kriyat Shema at night is less essential for setting the tone for your day. You can say it at any point at night, though you should have alacrity and say it sooner. But in essence, you can say it at any time at night, and you're still setting the tone for the day that's going to come. Whereas in the morning, you want to make it first thing in the morning. But still, yeah. So that might be the reasoning of the other sages. But from where do they get that? So it could be that that's their tradition. That's just the oral tradition they have. But if that's not the oral tradition, I would say if it's svara, meaning it's just from reasoning that they derived that from the verse, then I would say, how can you assume that? How can you assume that the verse that seems to make this complete parallel between lying down and getting up, how can you assume that that's how can you really dare to apply such reasoning on that verse? So there's probably a lot of answers to that question, a lot of Torah knowledge that answers that question that I'm not aware of. Okay. We don't call that the time of lying down. And beforehand, nami lav zman shchiva. That's also not the time for lying down. Hmm. Now Rashi could be answering an implied question here. I already touched on this last time. Like, why is he even referring to the time before? The Mishnah doesn't even talk about that. Rashi like starts going onto this other path that isn't explicitly regarded in the Mishnah. In other words, what I'm saying is that you could have just said literally the very first sentence. You could have just said, until the end of the first watch, Rashi could have just said a third of the night. And maybe, as it says in the Gemara explicitly in 2 pages. And then maybe he could have said, and from then on out, the time is up, because it's not called the time for lying down anymore, which means he's trying to explain the reasoning of Rabbi Eliezer. And then what Rashi does is he says, and beforehand, it's not called the time for lying down either. Now, that could be there for a few reasons. One, it could be there to explain, to further back up the reasoning of Rabbi Eliezer, meaning, let me show you also how it works beforehand. The time for lying down also isn't before then. So that is the reasoning of Rabbi Eliezer. And I'm giving you the full picture. Or it could also be that he's answering an implied question, which is, why isn't Kriyat Shema, the time for it, beginning when the evening begins? Why do you have to wait for the 3 stars to come out? And the answer is because any sooner than the 3 stars is not called the time when people go to bed. People don't go to bed when there's still light out. And when it's officially nightfall, when it is dark, when it is, according to every opinion, dark, that's when people start to go to bed. That's a possible answer. And I remember I answered it last time with an answer that was quite satisfactory, but I don't remember it. So we're going to continue with my seemingly new satisfactory answer. לאו זמן שכיבה, לפיכך הקורא קודם לכן לא יצא ידי חובתו. Therefore, whoever reads Kriyat Shema before the time for lying down did not fulfill their obligation. Right, so this is interesting. So why did Rashi add this line? Why did Rashi not satisfy himself with simply explaining that you don't have we were just talking about the time where you're obligated to do Kriyat Shema. He doesn't have to add that whoever does it beforehand doesn't do their obligation. But it could be in the same vein that when we see later in the Mishnah. Yeah, this might be why Rashi says this. Wow. This is why you really need to know all of Shas to answer questions sometimes. If this is the answer for why Rashi says this, it's a pretty chazak answer, but this really does require knowledge of all of Shas, but in this case, just brachos, and in this case, just the next Mishnah, or a couple Mishnahs forward, maybe just the next. But basically, what it says about Kriyat Shema of the morning is it says that you can say it until 3 hours in the morning, according to who is it? Maybe Rabbi Eliezer? That would be interesting if Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says that. But bottom line, the most lenient opinion, which is, by the way, lahalacha, not necessarily lachatchila today, but lahalacha, is you can say it till the end of the third hour in the morning after sunrise. And then it says, whoever says it afterwards, "Ke'ilu koreh Torah." It's as if they are reading Torah, which means that they get schar. The general interpretation of that is you don't get schar for Kriyat Shema, but you do get schar for saying like words of Torah. Now, what's interesting about that is why did the Mishnah bother to say that? The Mishnah simply has to say, you would think, that the Mishnah simply has to say that by the time the third hour ends, you no longer have the mitzvah. You no longer can say Kriyat Shema. The reason maybe it's telling us is that, hey, there's a few reasons possible. One is the Mishnah might be telling us, hey, don't don't give up. You didn't say it on time, do it anyways. You'll still get a mitzvah of saying words of Torah. Though I would challenge that and say, well, then just say any words of Torah. But again, this might also answer a question that we have later on Rashi, which I tried to answer last time, which is why you should stand from words of Torah in Kriyat Shema. Why it should be Davka Kriyat Shema when you don't do the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema. So it could be also in this case, the Mishnah is telling us, yes, there is a special thing about saying Kriyat Shema and that be your words of Torah. Because you're not just saying any words of Torah, you're saying the creed of our faith. So you might as well say that and then move on to more words of Torah. But okay, that's a possible answer, number one, which is associated with the answer to that question I asked about Rashi last time on why the words of Torah you should be standing from to say tefillah, to be in the Amidah, to say prayer, should be davka, precisely Kriyat Shema, specifically, and not just anything else. Even though, according to the rough reading of Rashi, if I were to take it at face value, it would be like, yeah, just say any Kriyat Divrei Torah. So that's number one. But another possible answer is it could be that the Mishnah assumes that the reader, though this is a stretch because the Mishnah doesn't seem to assume ignorance in other cases. But let's just go with this for a second. The Mishnah might be assuming ignorance on the reader's part here. The Mishnah might be saying, hey, I don't know if you are so familiar with the whole concept of timing in fulfilling obligations like prayer and blessings. Timing is a concept, and I want to introduce it to you. And I want you to understand that when you say Kriyat Shema not on time, you don't fulfill the same mitzvah as when you say it on time. And there is a special thing about time. And that might be why it's explicitly saying, yeah, anyone who says it after, I want you to know you haven't fulfilled the same kind of obligation. It's like you read Torah. So it's almost like, yeah, it's not something to be proud of. I mean, proud that you're doing another mitzvah, but it's just like any other words of Torah. In other words, you're not doing anything special that you're saying Kriyat Shema after the time. Don't use don't rationalize and think that you're not saying it on time yet you're still fulfilling the mitzvah. No. There's no getting through it. There's no cutting corners here. If you don't say Kriyat Shema on time, you're not fulfilling the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema. So there is a huge there is an unshakable boundary of time. And I'm here to tell you that if you say it afterwards, it's like you're reading Torah. It's not like you're saying Kriyat Shema. That's another reading of it, and that's another possibility. And then there's the third reading of it, which is the one I wanted to get to in order to answer this question of Rashi, which is why Rashi says the one who reads beforehand didn't fulfill their obligation. Rashi didn't seem to have to say that. Rashi could have just satisfied himself with saying that the time for saying Kriyat Shema is, according to Rabbi Eliezer, before from nightfall until the end of the first watch. But Rashi says, hey, no, anyone who reads beforehand did not fulfill their obligation. So I had another reason, but I don't remember it. But basically, it still works. The parallel still works. Basically, Rashi is whatever reason that the Mishnah used for the morning, where it said anyone who reads after did not fulfill their obligation. It's as if they are reading from the Torah and no more. Rashi is using that same reasoning to say whoever reads before did not fulfill the mitzvah, which could either be to say, hey, I'm introducing you to the concept of time. You can't say a thing before it's time. Or I'm about to tell you that it's words of Torah, but you're not fulfilling the mitzvah. It's not the same mitzvah. I don't know. Yeah, it's not clear. And then, mhm. Now it could be that Rashi, what he's doing here, is he's going in the same vein of the Mishnah. The Mishnah began by talking about when you start Kriyat Shema, and then it moves on to till when. And uh it seemed like Rashi didn't really have a smooth way to refer to the beginning of Kriyat Shema till he referred first to the end of Kriyat Shema, and then it's like he went back to the beginning of Kriyat Shema. He really wanted to address the beginning, but he couldn't have went to Me'ematai from when and started there because no, I mean he could have said Misha'a she'akwanim nechnesim lechol b'trumatan. He could have said there, yeah, anyone who says beforehand did not fulfill their obligation. Why is he putting it here? So it must be that this is still according to the Shita, to the um, opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. In other words, he's explaining all of this according to Rabbi Eliezer's reasoning. Why? Meaning, according to Rabbi Eliezer, I'm reading that the verse V'shach Becha, we are informed by V'shach Becha when we can say Kriyat Shema, which is till the end of the first watch, and it is no earlier than when the priests enter. But that would imply that according to the other opinions, it is earlier? No, right? So it could be that Rashi, yeah, it's just strange. I don't get why Rashi didn't put it earlier. Why is he putting it here? It's very weird. Why is Rashi telling us this? Why is Rashi saying that anyone who reads Kriyat Shema before the appointed time did not fulfill their obligation? It is so weird. You don't have to say that. Maybe it really is just to prepare the grounds for the next question. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it seems that according to Rashi, all of the this might be answered by the fact that according to Rashi, it seems that all of the Tanaim seems to share the opinion that Kriyat Shema is based off of the verse of V'shochbecha u'v'kumecha. And since they all agree on where the verse is based off of, when Rashi is telling us Rabbi Eliezer's basing his opinion off of the verse, that's a general statement about all of the three Tanaim. But he's just referring specifically to Rabbi Eliezer's reading of that verse. But now he's just going on to discuss generally the meaning and the significance of any reading of that verse, which basically all the readings agree with the fundamental principle that that verse is telling us the beginning time and the end time of Kriyat Shema. And it seems that everyone agrees on the beginning time, that B'Shorbecha begins with when the priests enter, and aka when the three stars come out. So that would explain why Rashi is doing it here. So we're learning a bit about Rashi's way of writing style. It seems that Rashi, I would, he doesn't necessarily write um, in A B C. It's more like, okay, something's really pressing me to write something here, and I'm gonna flow here, and I'm gonna actually tell you all of this as well. But that seems more like Tosfos. Like Rashi doesn't I don't as far as I know, Rashi doesn't do that often, but he does seem to do that sometimes. So when he's compelled to do that, it's an interesting phenomenon because it's like you could have brought this up earlier. So there must be some intrinsic connection. Like why did this have to come first? So I think the reason might be that before we weren't yet introduced to yeah, it would even be more, I think, clear that everyone agrees that we're reading the verse Beshochbecha here. So he would have put it earlier. "Misha'ah she'hakohanim nechnesim le'echol b'trumatan." And then Rashi would say there, everyone reads the verse Beshochbecha, and the beginning of that time, according to everyone, is when people are ready to go to bed. So I don't get why Rashi didn't say that. Very interesting. Yeah, so then it says, "Kedei la'amod so then Rashi asks, "Im ken lama korin ota bebet hakneset?" Since the time of Kriyat Shema only begins when the three stars come out, and you don't fulfill the obligation saying it earlier, so there seems to have been an ahava amina. There seems to have been a thought that maybe you would fulfill the obligation earlier, similar to davening, the prayer. But bottom line, he goes on to say, well, since you can't fulfill the obligation earlier, then why do we say it when we pray at shul, even before the three stars have come out? And the answer he gives is "Kedei la'amod batfila mitoch divrei Torah." And this we discussed the previous time, that there is a special aspect to standing in prayer from amidst words of Torah, from the middle of Torah, from a place of truth, from a place of being in the channel of godliness as a receptacle. That is a time you can truly make requests because you are in the head frame of God. And why is it specifically the words of Torah of Kriyat Shema? Because if you are going to say Kriyat Shema, you might as well say the central creed of our faith. And you might as well just not needlessly break the habit of Kriyat Shema. And it could also be Yeah. And it could also be that there's a special aspect to saying the bracha of Goel Yisrael, mentioning that God is our Redeemer right before we go into prayer, because we somech geula latfilah. We we roughly translated juxtapose the redemption to the prayer, mentioning redemption to prayer, and that mentioning of redemption should be made as a blessing and not just as some mundane mentioning. Well, it's no mundane mentioning to mention redemption, but as some other form of mentioning. The only way you can say it as a blessing is to say it as the blessings of Kriyat Shema, and that you are permitted to say before the three stars come out, because they're more general blessings. I would say that's probably one of the reasons, or the reason, because they're not they're not exactly Kriyat Shema 100% um, overlapping with Kriyat Shema, but they are also general blessings about God and His creation and His interaction with His creation. Okay. V'hachitanya b'braita b'brachot Yerushalmi, and this is what we review. This is what we derive in the Braita, in the corresponding tractate of this one, Brachot, in the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud. ולפיכך חובה עלינו לקרותה משתחשך. And therefore, we are obligated to read it when it gets dark. So maybe Rashi is trying to tell us this. When it gets dark, don't think that you already fulfilled the obligation when you were in shul. No, it says in the Yerushalmi. So this is what Rashi might be trying to do. This whole thing might actually be trying to just explain the Yerushalmi. The statement of, and therefore, it is an obligation to read it when it gets dark. And this is actually prompting me to look at the Yerushalmi and see if I'm onto something, because this is otherwise quite a perplexing organization of the Rashi. So let's look at the brachot of the Yerushalmi, and let's look at the very first page. We're looking at the same Mishnah. ממתי קוראים את שמע בערבין? דדדדדדן, הלכה. ממתי קוראים את שמע בערבין? אנן תנינן משעה שהכהנים נכנסים לאכול בתרומתן. We review in the Mishnah. We have written in the Mishnah from the moment the priests enter to eat in their elevation offering. Tani Rabbi Chia, but Rabbi Chia teaches or reviews משעה שדרך בני אדם נכנסים לאכול פיתן בלילי שבת. Okay, so there's this whole debate about the different rabbis who cite different metrics for when it is time to start saying Kriyat Shema of the evening. For example, Rabbi Chia says that it's the time when people enter their homes, I assume, to eat their bread, to break bread in the eve of Shabbat. Vetani ala krovin divrehen liyot shavin, and we learn about this, that both of those aspects are pretty equal. So there's not really a difference in nafkamina. Itachame, come see, misha she'akohanim nechnesin lechol bitrumatan, yamama hu, ve'im kochvaya hu. Okay, so Rashi, okay, so well, let's see. Oh, okay, here we go. Amar Rabbi Yosef tiftar be'elin kufrania dekikaya deorchehon mistalka ad dehu yamama, detzad elon mekamei chayuta. Okay, Rabbi Yosef says we can learn, we can explain why they're actually equal times, even though generally speaking, people enter their homes to eat from bread way later than when the Kohanim enter to eat the elevation offering. It's interesting that the Yerushalmi says that the priests enter to eat their elevation offering, it's still daytime. And with stars, I guess yeah, like there's still light out. You can still see some light when there's stars. You still see the sun light a little bit. But when people enter to eat their bread on the eve of Shabbat, it's already like it's already nighttime. And so how the heck are those equal times? Rabbi Yosei says we can solve this with the poor people, I think, whose way is to uh-huh. Let's see the translation. I think it's that they go home early because they want to avoid animals. Let's see. We were said da da da. Come see from the time that the priest entered. Da, 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 da. It's interesting. The Yerushalmi says come see. The Bavli says come here, which I won't get into now, but that's very special. You want to say that those two opinions are almost identical. Rabbi Yosei said, explain it by people in hamlets, a small settlement, generally one smaller than a village, who usually leave the roads when there still is some daylight because they are afraid of wild beasts. Okay, so there are certain circumstances where eating on the eve of Shabbat is earlier, and that's what the that Rabbi Chia must be referring to, and or at least what the Talmud is reading Rabbi Chia is referring to when it says that they're very close to being the same time. Tane, and this is what we're trying to get to. We learn Hakore kodem lachen lo yetsa yedei chovato. Anyone who reads the Kriyat Shema earlier did not fulfill their obligation. אם כן, למה קוראים אותה בבית הכנסת? If so, why do we read it in shul and synagogue? אמר רבי יוסי, אין קוראים אותה בבית הכנסת בשביל לצאת ידי חובתו. We don't do it in synagogue to fulfill the obligation. אלא כדי לעמוד בתפילה מתוך דבר של תורה. But rather to stand in prayer from a word of Torah, a matter of Torah. רבי זרע בשם רבי ירמיה, ספק בירך על מזונו, ספק לא בירך, צריך לברך. תכתיב ואכלת ושבעת וברכת. ספק יתפלל, ספק לא יתפלל, אל יתפלל. ספק קרא, ספק לא קרא, נשמעינה מהדה, הקורא קודם לכן לא יצא ידי חובתו. קודם לכן לאו ספק הוא, ואת אמר צריך לקרות. הדה אמרה ספק קרא, ספק לא קרא, צריך לקרות. סימן לדבר צאת הכוכבים. Okay, I didn't get this. Whatever. All right. It's a little deep what I'm trying to get, but okay. So for some reason, Rashi brings the Yerushalmi. When I'm less tired, because I'm very tired this morning, very, 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 very tired. Please God, I will be able to make some more coherent understandings of all of this. I felt like I'm either really humble this morning and I really understand how much I don't understand, or I'm really not getting things right now. And like there were other times when I just really like the other times I just got it better because I could reach like solid conclusions because of and you know what could also just be yeah, I need to humble myself and yeah, whatever. I have thoughts about that. We'll talk about it another time if we do end up talking about it. Lina there. Okay. לפיכך חובה עלינו לקרותה משתחשך. And that's what we learn in the Berachot of Yerushalmi. And let's see, this is if I looked at what Rashi was referring to. Yeah. And it says, "V'kirat parasha rishona she'adam koreh mitato yatsa." And Rashi is informing us that the first, just the first paragraph of Kriyat Shema that a person says in bed, you already fulfilled the obligation of Kriyat Shema. Today, I don't think that's la halacha. I think if you didn't say Kriyat Shema at time, you for the night, you want to say all the three paragraphs. So this seems to be an opinion of Rashi. And I'm looking for my water. And yeah, it's not very and we're just gonna move on. I think I'm more in a Bakias mode right now because of my exhaustion. But yeah, slowly but surely we shall we're gonna learn no matter what. This is good motivation to sleep, guys, because if you don't sleep, you're not gonna learn Talmud very well. All right, Ad She'ale Amud HaShachar. This is the next Rashi. So now we're talking about Chachamim's opinion. No, we're talking about Rabban Gamliel's opinion. So Rashi doesn't refer to Chachamim. He seems to assume that we get why Chachamim are saying what they're saying. Or he seems to assume that Rabban Gamliel is going to tell us why they're saying what they're saying. And Rabban Gamliel is saying the truth, according to Rashi, maybe. Ad she'ala amud hashachar, so Rabban Gamliel says until dawn. Now I had a question. Rabban Gamliel explains that Chachamim put a fence, essentially, and that's the only reason that they seem to de facto practically disagree. So my question is, why didn't if Rabban Gamliel understands the reasoning for the fence, why didn't he decide to put that fence? Why isn't he in agreement with them? Well, this is a great example of disagreeing while respecting and understanding another's opinion. You can see this in the very first page of the Talmud. So we clearly know how to do that as a people. So, what does Rashi say? According to Rabban Gamliel, the entire night is called the time for lying down. So it seems that the reading of Rabban Gamliel is that it's not the process of lying down, getting to bed, but it's rather being in bed. Or a way to say that it is consistent with the reading of the morning and it's just a process of getting to bed is that, yeah, people go to bed all night. And honestly, we don't want to necessarily discourage people from going to bed later or earlier at night. But we do want to discourage people from getting up later or earlier in the morning. But that would imply that that's a rabbinic injunction to say Kriyat Shema by the end of the third hour. So what I'm saying doesn't seem to hold water. But it still could be that de facto they believe, Rabban Gamliel believes, that the entire night is the time for going to bed. Though I don't know if that's very compelling. I don't know. So now we're talking about the incidents where Rabban Gamliel is comparing Kriyat Shema according to Chachamim in his eyes to the burning of the organs and the fats, the fats and the organs, as well as anything that's eaten for one day, all the offerings that can only be eaten for one day, and then they have to be burnt. של קורבנות שנזרק דמן ביום of sacrifices whose blood was thrown in the day. Yeah, because those are parts of the sacrifices that you don't eat, that aren't consumed, and they burn all night. And that's akin to why we say the nighttime prayer, because we parallel the prayers to the different sacrifices. Morning sacrifice being with the morning prayer, afternoon sacrifice, afternoon prayer, and then the burning of the organs and the fats in the evening being equivalent to the evening prayer, which is also why some say in the Talmud that it's optional, or maybe everyone says that it's optional in the Talmud. In any event, but lahalacha, it's not optional. So in any event, לפיכך חובה, okay. הקטיר חלבים באיברים של קורבנות שנזרק דמן ביום. Now, why did Rashi say that? Well, he's just helping us understand what we're talking about here. Mitzvatan, it is their mitzvah, להעלות כל הלילה, ואינן נפסלים בלינה עד שיעלה עמוד השחר, והן למטה מן המזבח. דכתיב לא ילין לבוקר. So here he's referring I think he's referring here to the offerings that can be eaten for one day. He's saying that there is lipasel belina, which means something that you it's basically not reaching the due date, the due time for disposing of the offer of the sacrificed animal. And he says that it's not disqualified in that sense until dawn. חלבים של כל קורבנות. So every sacrifice, the fats, the chelev, are burnt. They're not consumed. And it's interesting that Rashi is telling us that here. Evarim shel ola, and evarim, organs, is only of the ola. Now I get why it's organs. Because really, the ola offering, I believe, is an offering that you don't consume at all. That's why it's called an ola. It's basically an offering that just goes up, meaning it's an offering that the entire offering is given to Hashem and you don't consume any of it. The priests don't consume any of it, and therefore the organs are burnt. So that is what hekter chalavim ve'evarim, that's what organs in burning the fats and the organs is referring to. The olah offering. V'kol hane'echalim leyom echad, and everything eaten for one day. Kegon, for example, chatat, a sin offering, ve'asham, and a guilt offering, ve'kivsei atzeret, and the sheep of a festival, u'menachot ve'todah, and mincha offerings and thanksgiving offerings, mitzvatan, the time for eating them, right? So that means the mitzvatan of the previous one is actually about the burning of. Right. So I guess nifsalim belina that Rashi was referring to before, that it's disqualified as being kept overnight. Lina literally means sleep. So like just being kept, or yeah. Um, that's referring to the burning of the fats and the organs. That it has to be done by the end of the first night. And if you don't, then maybe it's disqualified from being burnt and you have to just dispose of it some other way. I don't know. But in any event, this mitzvatan is referring to the time of eating them, ad she'ale amud hashachar, until dawn arrives, v'hu mevian liot notar. And if it is dawn, then the priest brings those offerings that should be eaten in one day to be a notar, which is a remains. Dichtiv batoda, as it is written in the thanksgiving offering, lo yaniach mimenu ad boker. He should not leave any of it until the morning. V'kulam mitodai lamedu. And all of the other ones are learned, derived from the Thanksgiving offering instructions. So that's what Rashi is telling us. Rashi is really giving us a background on all the things mentioned here. And it's interesting that Rashi is giving us these backgrounds. Um, I wonder if this is really Rashi's MO in general, or if there's a particular reason he's giving it here. I'm pretty sure this is MO in general. It just gives the person, the reader, a background. And that's also a question. Why is that as MO? Maybe because, well, so we can be up to speed about the things that are mentioned. It's an opportunity to teach us things. And this might tell us about the previous things Rashi says. When Rashi sees an opportunity to teach us a more general thing, he gives it to us when it can be said in brief. It just seems appropriate to add it here. It's a good segue, so to speak, into something brief, efficiently, effectively educational. And then there is um I don't remember. Anyways, imken lama amru chachamim ad chatzot. And now Rabban Gamliel says, if so, if all of these things can be told on, why did the sages say? Why do I believe the sages say? Why does Rabban Gamliel believe that the sages say until midnight and not until dawn, even though they do believe it's till dawn from the Torah? B'kriyat Shema ve'achilat kodashim. This is interesting. Rashi says in Kriyat Shema and in the eating of holy, like Kodashim, which basically is eating, consuming the sacrifices, but or the offerings, but it doesn't seem to. Why isn't Rashi telling us also about the burning of the fats and the organs? Does Rashi not see that as also being until midnight? I don't understand. What the heck is Rashi saying here? And why did he even seem it necessary? Isn't it clear in the text that that's what Rabban Gamliel is referring to? Kol ma she'amru, everything that the sages said until midnight. their mitzvah is until dawn, which includes burning of the fats and the organs and everything that should be eaten in one day. But then Rashi says here that it seems to only include Kriyat Shema and the eating, the consumption of offerings, and not the burning of fats and organs. That is a very perplexing Rashi. So he seems to be bringing there seems to be another source, which is a midrash, but or no, yeah, very interesting. I don't get it. Like, I really don't get it. Oh, oh, wow, fascinating, fascinating. Maybe so. Rashi seems to be saying that if I understand Rashi correctly, the sages only explicitly say that the mitzvah is until midnight for Kriyat Shema and for the eating of offerings, but not for the burning of fats and organs. So where the heck, if that's true, then where the heck is Rabban Gamliel bringing that from? Because he says everything that the sages say until midnight is till dawn. So maybe he is aware, like Rashi, that the sages only say it for Kriyat Shema and for eating the offerings. But then he goes on and assumes that they also say the same for burning the fats and organs. Or he just gives all the examples of things that are till dawn. In other words, he's trying to say just like everything that's eaten for one day, sorry, just like the burning of the fats and organs has to be is until dawn, so too are these two other mitzvahs. That's a possibility. Or he's aware of an oral tradition that that hasn't been written down anywhere regarding the burning of the fats and the organs. Or I'm misreading Rashi and it is written down somewhere. Very interesting. Okay, let's move on. So, כדי להרחיק אדם מן העבירה, in order to distance man from transgression. Ooh, there's a long Rashi here. So this is maybe, hopefully, this will be referring also to what I was talking about back then, which is why they're not calling it a fence. Yeah. And I also remember asking more than that. I'm just so tired. Oh my gosh. So what does Rashi say? "והסרום באכילה קודם זמנן, כדי שלא יבוא לאוכלן לאחר עמוד השחר ויתחייב כרת." Ooh, so maybe it's just because these are really bad transgressions, according to Rashi. He says they actually made it so you're not allowed to eat after their time in order to not eat after dawn and be liable for being cut off, kares. כן בקריאת שמע, לזרז את האדם. And the same with קריאת שמע, to quicken man, שלא יאמר יש לי עוד שהות. So he shouldn't say that I have more time. ובתוך כך יעלה עמוד השחר, and through this, dawn should come. בעבר לו הזמן, and time is up. וכתר חלבים דקתני הכה לא אמרו בו חכמים עד חצות. Yeah, Rashi's saying this. But the burning of the fats, as we learn here in the Mishnah, the sages did not say till midnight klal at all. Velo nakat lehu hacha. And Rabban Gamliel didn't refer to this. Ela, the only reason he referred to this, lehodia shekol davar hanoeg balayla kasher kol halayla, that everything that is for all of the night is all right, all night, according to Rabban Gamliel. Ve'achi namit nan. And this is how we also learned in the Mishnah, Beperek Sheni de Megillah, in the second chapter of Megillah. Kol halayla kasher liktsirat haomer. All the night is proper for the reaping of the omer, ulhektir chalavim ve'evarim, and for the burning of the fats and the organs. Oh, so there's another thing of something that's allowed for all night. Now that might not be for one night alone. That's why Rabban Gamliel didn't bring it, or maybe Rabban Gamliel just didn't bring all the examples. Okay, guys, this was a pleasure. Thank you so much for tuning in. Whoever tuned in, I hope it was okay for you. I was so tired this session, and I should have mentioned it in the beginning. So like, I don't really make a lot of sense today. But, I asked a lot of questions and hopefully I'll remember them next time and we'll be able to refer to them in a way that brings good answers, or I'll be able to just say why those questions aren't really good questions. And either way, we'll get closer to the truth. Bezrat Hashem, may He help us. And yeah, I hope everyone has a wonderful day, a wonderful night, wherever and whenever you are. And in the meantime, may we all be blessed with the blessings of everything. Okay, revealed blessings.